Today I have the privilege of acting as moderator for this webinar, Ma'oz Tzur, Rock of Ages Through the Ages, to be presented by Cantor David Berger, of whom I will have a bit more to say in just a moment. Before we invite Adam Carroll to speak with us briefly about the technology of the webinar, I do want to take a moment to wish one and all a Chag Urim Sameach, a happy holiday on this Hanukkah, and a season filled with light and the faith that we are meant to be bringers of light in the darkness. And it would be remiss of us not to take a moment this day to think of the 40 victims of the fires in the Carmel region of Eretz Israel and the hundreds who have had to evacuate their homes, to pray that they will be returned in safety to their own homes, and that those who are rendered mourners by this tragedy will find comfort among the grievers for Zion and Jerusalem, and to pray that the season going forward will be one of hope and harmony and security for all. With that, Adam, please tell us how we are to conduct ourselves.
Thanks, Rex. The webinar broadcast has begun with all attendees in listen-only mode. Before the presentation begins, we would like to review a few guidelines for webinar attendees. Next slide, please.
Oh, yes. Sorry, my audio keeps on cutting in and out.
You should all see a panel in your window similar to the example at the right. This control panel presents each attendee with various options related to our webinar presentation. Please familiarize yourself with this panel so you can have an optimal webinar experience. If the panel is getting in your way, you can minimize it by clicking on the double arrows. You can disregard the raise hand icon. Any questions you have, please type them in the questions log. You have the option of choosing one of two audio modes: use telephone or use mic and speakers. Please select a mode that works best for you, but also be aware that most components do not have a built-in microphone, so selecting the telephone for your audio mode is often the best bet. When using the telephone component, be sure to enter your audio pin, which is displayed in the audio pane. If you are encountering any technical issues with the webinar experience, please type your questions in the questions log and I will do my best to assist you. If you continue to have difficulty with any portion of the webinar, please contact GoToWebinar Help, either by calling the helpline and selecting option 1, or by clicking on the help option on top of your webinar panel and selecting GoToWebinar Help. Also, just a note, there was some pre-read material that was distributed to registrants. If you registered a couple days before the webinar, you may not have received it, but it will be available online when the recording of the webinar and the PowerPoint presentation will all be archived at urj.org/webinars/archive, and that will be posted, I'm sure, somewhere in this PowerPoint presentation. Thank you for your attention and patience, and let's begin our presentation.
It is now my pleasure to present our presenter for the day, Cantor David Berger, an attendee of the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he received his M.A. in Jewish philosophy, going on to receive his cantorial investiture at the Hebrew Union College. Cantor Berger currently serves as cantor of Congregation Tikvat Jacob in Manhattan Beach, California. He serves as well on the board of the American Conference of Cantors. Last month, Cantor Berger traveled to Rome with a delegation of 20 cantors from the American Conference of Cantors to share Jewish musical traditions at the Basilica Santa Maria degli Angeli e dei Martiri on a mission designed to foster greater understanding between Jews and Catholics. David has taught workshops on Jewish musical history and development for the ACC, the Cantors Assembly, the North American Jewish Choral Festival, and more. Recently, he has appeared in concerts in New York City, Los Angeles, London, Rome, and Jerusalem. Today he has prepared for us this wonderful new experience of a hymn which perhaps you think you know well or too well, and about which today we are confident you will learn a great deal more and appreciate all the more fully. Canterberger, they are yours.
Thanks, Rex. So I want to start out, first of all, by just saying, what is Ma'oz Tzur? Ma'oz Tzur is a piyut, which is just a standard word for a liturgical poem. The world of piyut includes things like Adon Olam or Yigdal or Lecha Dodi, and lots of things that we come across in our regular liturgy all the time, as well as a whole world of additional poetic insertions written by great rabbis and scholars and thinkers for the entire breadth of Jewish history. Ma'oz Tzur itself has its first appearance in 13th century, we think Germany, probably somewhere on the border of Germany and Italy. We know the author of it is someone named Mordechai, but that is all we know about this person. We know it's Mordechai because each of the verses of Ma'oz Tzur, the first letter spells out the name Mordechai. And there are some theories about it being this Mordechai or that Mordechai, but none of them has ever led to any conclusive evidence. So all we can say is some guy named Mordechai, 13th century somewhere, Germany or Italy. And though we, especially in the modern world, tend to only sing mostly the first verse, some people will sing one additional verse, the full piece has 6 verses. So let's go right into looking at those verses before we look at the music. I'm offering here the translation by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who is the chief rabbi of the British Empire, from his wonderful new prayer book, the Koran Sidur. So let's look at the text, starting with that first verse that we know very familiar. Ma'oz Tzur Yeshu'ati, refuge, rock of my salvation. Lecha na'el shabeach, it is a delight to give praise to you. Tikon beit tefilati, restore my house of prayer. Visham toda nizabeach, so that there I may offer you thanksgiving. Then here comes the one verse that is very complicated, and even Rabbi Sachs has tended away from a direct translation. Le'et tachin matbeach mitzar haminabeach, which he has somewhat glossed over as when you silence the loud-mouthed foe, and which in a more literal translation may mean something more like at the time when you will prepare a slaughtering place for the bleating enemy. So it's really a very violent, sort of difficult place, a very difficult, violent line. And we'll see that there's a sense of this poem, which if you place it indeed in that time of 13th century Germany and Italy, we're talking about the Crusades. We're talking about a time when the Jewish community was experiencing massive attacks from the outside and was really feeling vulnerable. And so these images of sometimes very violent conflict and victory are going to appear over and over again in this poem. So that's that very difficult line. And then it comes lovely, right? Az egmor b'shir mizmor chanukat hamizbeach. Then I will complete with song and psalm the altar's dedication. So that's the first verse. That's the one we all pretty much know. But let's go on to some of the other ones that I'm sure many of us have never seen. So verses 2 to 4 talk about the various disasters of the Jewish people. We begin with slavery in Egypt. It's troubles state. And notice, by the way, that acrostic that I talked about before. Remember, Ma'oz Tzur started with a mem. The second one, Ra'ot, starts with a resh, and etc. It spells out the name Mordechai. So trouble sated my soul. They embittered my life with hardship. It's very difficult, right? And then here comes the violent ending again, right? God with, and in Rabbi Sachs' translation, his great power brought out his treasured people. while Pharaoh's host and followers sank like a stone into the deep. So here we get this, this sense of my victory, the Jewish victory has to come at the sort of extreme pain of the enemy. Okay, so that's Egypt. The next one is in the exile to Babylon. Right, so we were able to be in God's holy abode in the land of Israel. Then the oppressor came and exiled me. I drank poisoned wine. I almost perished. I mean, imagine if you survived the Crusades, which was really terrible. That kind of line, I almost perished, is really, they're not just talking about Babylon. And then here we go. Then Babylon fell, Zerubbabel came. Within 70 years, I was saved. That one doesn't necessarily give you the extent of the violent ending, but let me tell you, if you were a Babylonian, the fall of Babylon and the coming of Zerubbabel was indeed quite violent and terrible. And 70 years is the 70 years between the exile to Babylon and when the Jews were able to come back and resume life in the land of Israel. The next one, the story of Purim, right? The Agagite son of Hamadatha, that's Haman, boo, right? Sought to cut down the tall fir tree, which is a midrashic reference to Mordechai. But it became a trap to him, right? So, you raised up the head of the Benjamite, the enemy's name you blotted out, and hung them, right? So there comes our metaphor again. So then let's come to the verse about Hanukkah. So here we are in the actual verse that tells the story of Hanukkah. Okay, so we have Yevanim nikbetzu alai, the Greeks gathered against me, azai bimei chashmanim, in the days of the Hasmoneans, right? Hasmoneans is the other name of the Maccabees. Ufartzu chomot migdalai, they broke down the walls of my towers, v'tim'u kol hashmanim, and they defiled all the oils, uminotar kankanim, but from the last remaining flask, na'asa nes lashosh shanim, a miracle was wrought for your beloved. Yemei bina, b'nei vina, yemei shmona, kav'u shir unanim. Therefore, the sages ordered these 8 days for song and praise. So one thing I want to say that's interesting about this verse for me is certainly in the sort of the history of the way Hanukkah is told, right? There are two very separate stories that we often tell. We often tell the military victory very strongly, and maybe Israelis are more commonly told that version of the story. And the story of the oil for 8 days is sort of a Talmudic insertion later. And you would think if someone is going for a version that talks about a major Jewish victory that inflicted pain on a foe, you'd think that they would go for the military story. But it's interesting that with the rest of these verses being so negative, somehow the verse about Hanukkah itself says nothing about the pain inflicted on those enemies. It says only about the miracle and the light and the song and praise that was for the Jews. So that's something I think is really special to think about in this context, that Hanukkah, despite the sort of violence of the story, could also be seen as at least within this poem, a source of a different way to look at the world. I want to play for you guys one first recording before we get to talking about sort of the overwhelming normal melody of Ma'oz Tzur. This is a pan-Hasidic melody for this specific verse. And the way they do it there in the Hasidic world is that they tend to start it out a little slower, and it gets faster and faster and faster. For those of you who downloaded the packet, you'll find the page of music that this is in there. It's called Yevanim Nikbetzu Alai, a pan-Hasidic melody. Let's take a listen to some, I think these are buoyant Hasidim in the recording. Okay, so that's the melody. They keep on going around and around and around. It's a very, very joyful melody, and I really enjoy it, especially because I think a lot of us the main verse of Ma'oz Tzur becomes the entire song, and this is a very attainable melody to start out with slow, and it's not that many words, I find. And I love the Hasidic spirit of it. I love the focus of returning to the idea of this kind of Hanukkah story. So we're going to take one step to the 6th verse of Ma'oz Tzur. This verse was actually, a lot of research has been done about this verse because it was deleted from prayer books for hundreds of years. Some say up to 500 years that this verse, this stanza, just disappeared. And so there was an immediate question, well, is this then original, or was this added on? So let's read through it first. So bear your holy arm and hasten the time of salvation. Take retribution against the evil nation on behalf of your servants. For the hour of deliverance has been too long delayed. There seems no end to the evil days. Thrust the enemy into the darkness of death and establish for us the 7 shepherds. And the 7 shepherds, as you see in the note, is a reference to the book of Micah, that there will be 7 shepherds who will shepherd with swords. Not a peaceful image. We're used to seeing shepherds in a little happier way, and these shepherds are not the kind of shepherds you want to see. So this verse, there were several theories. There are some that said maybe it was taken out because of non-Jewish pressure about having a text that is a little objectionable on this, but the prevailing view of various theorists is that actually it was self-censored by the Jewish community, who felt that it was an inappropriate prayer, and they were worried lest some non-Jews look in the prayer book and see a kind of prayer that was clearly praying for the immediate death of the non-Jewish community. So it was taken out for a long time. If you look in Orthodox prayer books, it will often have found its way back into the prayer books in modern printings. And even, I think this translation of Rabbi Sachs's here even has a tendency to even soften the impact of the Hebrew. The Hebrew is really quite harsh. So it's very understandable why this verse might have been taken out for quite a long time. And as I said, the research has shown that it is indeed original, not a later addition. So let's move from the text right into one other piece of text, which is the traditional Rock of Ages that we tend to sing in the English community. So this Rock of Ages is not exactly a translation of the Hebrew. This English version was prepared by the Reverend Marcus Jastrow and Gustav Gottheil, who were 2 really important figures in American Reform Judaism. Marcus Jastrow, for anyone who has spent any time in the rabbinic sort of world, knows him from his dictionary that he wrote of Talmudic Aramaic and words. And he is also, if you know your old Union hymnals, wrote a number of hymns for congregational singing. So they translated from the German by Leopold Stein, who was a very important rabbi in Berlin in the 19th century, and a leader in Reform Judaism there, who wrote this 3 verses version of Ma'oz Tzur, Rock of Ages. And if you look through it, you actually find very little similarity to the original. Yes?
Excuse me one moment.
Sure.
We have been asked if you are able to name the page of the download packet, as it's 17 pages long, and also if there is a way to send it. I can work with Adam on this. To send it. Mark Lewis, if you'll send me your email address, I'll be happy to send that on to you. But if you are able to announce page numbers in the packets,
I actually did not get I don't myself have that version. So maybe can you, Rex, if I call something out, can you help me out with that? Do you have it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think I can. Let me see if I've got it as pages. You know what I do elsewhere. I will pull it up right now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So this text you'll find in this Rock of Ages English text you'll find sort of in any book. But I think what's interesting for me is the last verse of it, this children of the martyr race. And this actually in a way does connect to that original 6th verse, but turns it into the most beautiful side of classical Reform Jewish theology. So children of the martyr race, whether free or fettered, wake the echoes of the songs where ye may be scattered. Yours the message cheering that the time is nearing, which will see all men free and tyrants disappearing. So what I enjoy is the violence of that image of that sixth verse. That sixth verse, which was in its essence praying for a better future, just doing it in a sort of narrow perspective that was based on coming from a really truly oppressed and violent place. And these great Reform rabbis were able to recognize that part of the prayer of Hanukkah is a future redemption that sees all people free. So let's come right into the melody. You can hear in the background a little recording of an organ playing a prelude of Ma'oz Tzur. You see it's printed in all sorts of different kinds of hymnals and choir books dating back to the 19th century. In English, in German, etc. What's interesting is actually if you look in some of the earlier things, you will not find a Hebrew version, but you will find these various English translations. Keep going. So let's talk about the melody itself. Right, this melody that you have a sheet in there which has these slides written out onto one page about the sources of the melody. Dr. Eric Werner, who was a musicologist and profound scholar in the history of mostly Ashkenazic Jewish music, taught at HUC, drew out these pieces that seem to echo pieces of the original Ma'oz Tzur melody, following upon the work of Abraham Zvi Edelson, the great sort of original Jewish musicologist. So
this is page 7 of the packet for those of you who are following, starting with enumerating from the cover, page 7.
Thank you, Rex. So what we're looking for in this is not to be able to identify that there is a piece of music that Ma'oz Tzur was stolen from, but that we're seeing that the phrases that eventually built up the complete melody of Ma'oz Tzur were in the air of 15th and 16th century Germany. So interestingly, the very first hymn written by Martin Luther, right, in one of his first acts after putting up his big 95 thesis and all that kind of stuff, was to begin writing hymns in German for the people to be able to learn sort of his new way. So his very first hymn follows this exact melody, da 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 da, right? Which you can see there on the page. And according to Werner, etc., he's quoting from an even earlier thing of 1483. This piece on the bottom. So we can see that this melody is in there, and you have in your packet, just for the sake of enjoying that, the way that hymn of Martin Luther has passed down to us in English from the songs Ancient and Modern, or hymns Ancient and Modern, which you have the full English hymn there. But the relationship to Ma'oz Tzur ends pretty much after that first line. But for future reference, that entire hymn is quite lovely. Sadly, that melody is no longer sort of the mainstream melody for that hymn text, so it's kind of fallen out of use. Here's the second phrase, right? And Werner finds it in a piece from 1540, right? He has Van Konig Maximilian geboren Uttersreich, right? So you hear the same da 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 da, the same exact sort of phrase repeated there. So again, I'm not saying that someone stole. I'm saying that the idea is that these kinds of phrases were in the air and give us a sort of idea of when-ish this melody may have been put together. The third phrase, Azegmor Bashir Mizmor, we find in a piece from 1544, which again, we're just saying that this one is a real folk song. Apparently, it's a song about a woman who is very mischievous and lying to you. So it's kind of funny that kind of phrase would find its way into our very sacred song. But all three things put together were clearly a recognizable melody. And what we know is that in this book called the Chavas Yair, or Shut, which means Sheilot Teshuvot, or the Book of Responsach, Chavot Yair, published around 1690 by Rabbi Yair Chaim Bacharach, he gives a whole set of liturgical poems, and in that set of liturgical poems he has a Hanukkah piece, which he mentions in it, and I'm going to try to read for you. I know the Hebrew here is written in what's called Rashi script, and it's very unclear and difficult to read. But he says, "Vishar Zkeni, Avi Zkeni." He's talking about my father, the Gaon, the genius, when he was so many years old. He was the rabbi of the community of Kiglin in Germany, and he would v'nahag kavod Adoni Avi, and my honored father, who a blessed memory, used to sing this particular melody, Lizamro bechol leilei Chanukah, every night of Hanukkah, V'ani acharav, and I too, in his memory, sing this melody, B'nigun Ma'oz Tzur, to the melody of Ma'oz Tzur. So that's to say, if a person in 1690 can say, I sing this in the melody of Ma'oz Tzur, that, by the way, there is a recognizable melody for Ma'oz Tzur, which is not necessarily to be taken for granted. So there's at least evidence that someone knew about a melody for it. But we don't actually have printed music yet, especially because the Jewish community was not super up on knowing how to write music down. So the very first time that we see that anyone has ever indicated they've seen something printed that has to do with this particular melody in Hanukkah comes from 1744. But sadly, that manuscript doesn't exist anymore. It was destroyed, so we can't look at and see what it says, but there is a musicological record that someone saw something there that reminded them of Ma'oz Tzur as part of Hallel. However, what we actually do have is surprisingly not for Shavuot, or not for Hanukkah, but rather for the holiday of Shavuot, which comes from 1760 from the cantorial manuscript of Aaron Beer, which, if you're looking at this and you're a music reader, you might not necessarily see the Ma'oz Tzur in there, but you get da 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 da, right, which is da 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 da. It's sort of a rough following of the texture of Ma'oz Tzur. And that is as early as we have anything that even relates in any sort of superficial way to Ma'oz Tzur. So we're talking about a melody that's probably from somewhere in the 1550s or so put together, and we don't, for 200 years it's developing and being sung by people, but we don't have written evidence of that. Eric Werner points out that perhaps there's one other thing to be aware of, which is that there is another piyut, another liturgical poem for Hanukkah, which has sort of fallen out of practice, because in general the services used to be filled with these extra poems for every special holiday, every special Shabbat, every special event. There was more and more special poems that people would put in. And the poem for Hanukkah, called Shnei Zeitim, which means 2 olives, was perhaps, according to Werner, perhaps originally the melody that we know as Ma'oz Tzur was actually Shnei Zeitim. So here's how Werner thinks that, in fact, Shnei Zeitim fits the contours of the Ma'oz Tzur melody better. So he writes, Shnei Zeitim nichtarim begad na'ul yatziru b'rosh kehati ve'efrati shtei atarot yachtiru, etc., etc. So it fits very nicely. He particularly enjoys the iru parts, like yatziru, yachtiru, all those kinds of things. Hard to know if he's indeed correct. What we do know is that perhaps the melody for Ma'oz Tzur was considered, or the melody we now know as Ma'oz Tzur was such a precious and special melody that maybe, as his theory goes, as singing this poem Shnei Zeitim fell out of favor, perhaps the melody for Ma'oz Tzur survived even when Shnei Zeitim did not, if we know what I mean. And just Werner and Idelson noted that the melody that Shnei Zeitim tends to be sung to these days also has a certain similarity to Ma'oz Tzur. Shnei Zeitim nichtarim began yatziru. It goes on from there. So there is a certain, it starts a da-da-da-dum-ish feeling to it. You have a copy of this music in there for your own future reference if you choose to access that. It's actually a very, very beautiful text, which really deserves attention. It's sort of lovely in its image of priest, king, scholar, and everyone sort of being able to stand together in a united vision of Israel. So let's go on from there to the very first printed copy of Ma'oz Tzur as such, which, as it turns out, is not as such. This is in 1815. Isaac Nathan, who is well known in Australia as one of the fathers of Australian classical music. Before he moved to Australia, he was in London, and he wrote a sort of book called Hebrew Melodies, where he took sort of Jewish prayer melodies of all types, things like Kol Nidre are there, and he set them to English poems by Lord Byron. Lord Byron had a very special relationship with Isaac Nathan, so the two of them worked together on this. And here's the first place that you're ever going to get Ma'oz Tzur, the full melody written out as it is. You have in your packet a full copy of that original 1815 publication. So let's listen in for a minute to the setting. And remember, you're not listening for Ma'oz Tzur, the words, you're listening for the melody as sung to the poem called On Jordan's Banks by Lord Byron.
Page 9.
I'll pause it there. It's a little bit of a clumsy setting in many ways. The key is kind of crazy that you heard the singer had to go from a very high range to his very low range in order to get through the song. So it's not the ultimate beautiful musical vision of Ma'oz Tzur that we would like, but it is 1815, the first publication of this melody in its entirety. I want to actually point out one sort of specific, sort of unusual variation of Ma'oz Tzur, which you will only encounter amongst British Jews. Julius Mambach was the choir director of the Great Synagogue of London for quite a good stretch of time and a very influential moment of development of British Jewish music. And he, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia of 1904, he made this modulation, says, to the dominant and the repetition of the first strain shown in this transcription above. So for those of you who don't read music super well, I will sing for you this, and sort of strangely, they put it to they put the music here to that verse about Hanukkah, the verse about the Greeks. I'll sing it for you in the regular first verse of Ma'oz Tzur. So it starts out normally, Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati L'chana L'shabeach Tikon Beit Tefilati V'sham Toda Nezabeach Le'tachid Mapeach. After that it goes on the same. But notice that V'sham Toda Nezabeach, which at first I saw this in the Jewish Encyclopedia, and I thought, okay, maybe that's a fun, interesting, dusty reference of from a book from 1904, but by now everyone must sing it the same. And then I had the great fortune of talking with cantor Zoe Jacobs, who is a graduate of HUC and the cantor of the Finchley Reformed Synagogue in London, who informed me that American Jews just sing this wrong, and that the British way is obviously correct, and she is a staunch defender of doing it that way. And other British Jews that I've interviewed in the meantime have also told me we as Americans are just incorrect, and that their way is obviously correct. So what they don't usually know is that indeed their way was written by a person that we can identify at a certain point in history. So I feel like we're correct, but it is a variation which, if you hang out with British Jews, you will hear them sing, and people can get quite aggravated by by the variation. the melody of Ma'oz Tzur has become sort of the leitmotif of Hanukkah, which is, in the sense that if you're in almost any kind of synagogue around, people around Hanukkah will start singing many, many different melodies to the many different prayers to the text of Ma'oz Tzur. So here's an example from Ma'oz Tzur, the great cantor of Vienna from 1838, who, if you can see, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, and it goes on to many, many examples of Ma'oz Tzur being used, especially in the Hallel prayers, the special inserted psalms that give a lot of joy on all holidays. People tend to sing Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, etc., etc., all to the melody of Ma'oz Tzur, and that's been going on for quite a long time. I want to give you two alternative versions, at least, of this melody. One is by Julie Silver. Many of you might be familiar with a lot of her music. She's been writing for the Reform community for quite a long time. And she included Ma'oz Tzur in her Hanukkah CD that she produced, but wrote her own English words, which I think are really quite beautiful. So I'm going to let you listen in on Julie for a minute, and then we'll come in with Kenny Ellis, who has a real different take on it.
Rock of ages, hear our song of peaceful revolution. Tired of battles fierce and long, we yearn for resolution. We are young and learning, but the tide is turning, and your words light a fire within our souls. It's burning, and your words light a fire within our souls. It's burning.
I think her version of it is really beautiful, and you can hear a sort of echo of what those earlier Reform rabbis, Jastrow and Gottheil and Leopold Stein, did in their English version of trying to turn a prayer that was in many ways very violent and difficult into a prayer for the kind of values that we believe in, of a better world, and to really take in the idea of Hanukkah light as something that lights us up and encourages us to go out into the world. I want to, as one sort of last setting of this this traditional melody that we all know and love, play Kenny Ellis's Hanukkah Swings just for a slightly different take. I gotta say, once I heard this, I sort of can't get this kind of version out of my head, and I really enjoy it a lot. So let's take a sample of Kenny Ellis's Hanukkah Swings.
Azekmor b'shir mizmor Chanukah hamizbeh Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati L'chana Elishabeah Tikon.
I think you can get the idea from there. It's really a lot of fun. So I want to just open up to see if people have questions about that traditional melody before I continue on with other things. Rex, can you help me out with some of the questions?
Yes, so we right now have received only one question directly on topic, which is from participant Jordan Friedman, who is asking whether Isaac Nathan's Australian setting was intended for use in Jewish worship.
You know, the origin of the whole set of songs, I don't think was about Jewish worship. My impression of the full set of his Hebrew melodies is that there was very current at the time, sort of a sort of obsession with ancient melodies. That we'll see more about that later. That there is, at least within sort of 18th and 19th and even earlier centuries, a certain attraction to traditional Jewish melodies. For various purposes, people thought they were somehow ancient or more special, and so you would, if you're sort of a keen observer of a lot of different music of that period, you might find that different people are trying to quote Jewish melodies at different times. And I think Isaac Nathan was keying into that with his whole set. I don't think it was ever intended for synagogues or even necessarily just for Jews. I think he was sort of catching into a sort of sense of Orientalism and a precious sense of ancient Jewish melody as being somehow more sacred than other things. But I don't think it was at all for synagogue. In fact, I think it's probably barely for Jews.
Thank you. And right now, the other question that we have, and you can determine, David, if you'd like to address this later or offline, our participant Rob Kushner is asking, acknowledging that it's a somewhat tangential question, but wondering if there are also alternative melodies for Hadlakat HaNerot, for the candle lighting blessings during this holiday.
You know, it is an interesting question. There are many composers who have put their craft to work in writing Hanukkah candle blessings. I don't know that anything other than sort of the Baruch Atah Adonai has ever gained any kind of real popularity. Sometimes in Israel people have different ways of doing it than the American standard, but yes, many people have set their compositional talents to Hanukkah blessings. No, I've never heard anything that took off popularly in a serious way anywhere else.
And of course, those old standards are awfully good.
Yes, and those melodies really do evoke Hanukkah for a lot of people. So when you change a melody like that on someone, you risk alienating them from what feels very authentic to them. So I definitely agree that there's some great room for creativity there, and I don't think the so-called traditional melody is going anywhere anytime soon. So thinking of upsetting people's melodies, let's go on to wait. There's another tune. Ma'oz Tzur has in fact been sung to a lot of tunes over history. Intonazione degli ebrei tedeschi sopra. So this is a melody recorded by a non-Jewish composer, and we'll go into him in a minute. He wrote it down in 1724. And this version that you're seeing on your screen, even with the Hebrew letters and all, is as recorded, as notated by a non-Jewish composer of 18th century Italy. So let's just listen in for 1 second to this melody, and then I'll talk about it. And just so we feel like it's not just sung by a beautiful soprani in recordings, but this is an ethnomusicological recording of it as done within the Italian Jewish community.
Ma'oz Tzur
You'll hear it sounds about the same. So this melody is notated by Benedetto Marcello, a non-Jewish composer who is really most famous for his settings of psalms. He wrote 50 psalm cantatas, and within those 50 psalm cantatas, he was keying into this sort of obsession with Jewish melody and traveling around northern Italy and found different Jewish communities, and in them, melodies that he thought were worthy of recording and including. So in the middle of his Psalm 15 cantata, we get this little piece here. really beautiful. You can, by the way, find a lot of his music. Just a quick search on iTunes, etc., will turn up a whole bunch of his pieces. He's especially a lot of I think his Psalm 19 is used a lot at weddings. So Marcello notated this melody and included it in his thing. And in fact, in the music it says canto ebraico before this Jewish melody comes in. And it really is just thrown in the middle. Psalm 15 has nothing to do with Ma'oz Tzur, and in fact, throughout his settings, he does not particularly care to match the original Jewish text that a piece was with, that a melody was set with an Italian text that has any connection to it. He just sort of finds a melody and enjoys it and throws it in into the middle of pieces. Like before this is a long recitative, and coming out of it, we're come towards the end of the piece with a sort of beautiful aria. And this melody actually has gained a lot of traction in it, and people tend to say it is the Marcello melody. It is not the Marcello melody because he did a great favor by transcribing it, but indeed he's not the composer of it. Eric Werner actually suggested that perhaps this melody is the original Ma'oz Tzur melody. As I said before, maybe it did the switch around with the Shnei Zaytim melody. But you'll find a lot of choirs sing this, a lot of people are into this. I think it's a really beautiful melody and gives us a different perspective on the text and a different perspective on Judaism, because this kind of melody, there's a piece of it that sort of can only come from northern Italy, and it's sort of cadences and the way that it flows. But that's only one of several other melodies that we're going to hear. So let's go on to a few, because we're coming in towards the last few minutes. I want to make sure we get a whole bunch of melodies in real fast. So Leib Glantz, one of the great cantors in the golden age of cantorial music, had an interest, sort of an academic interest in Ma'oz Tzur, and considered the melody that we usually sing to be a sin because it was of Christian origins, he wrote. And so he says, so he wrote his own melody, which I'm going to play for you, and he wrote, the melodic composition of the music and its rhythm strictly adhere to the special spirit of the Hanukkah Nusach, Nusach being the traditional melodies of Jewish prayer. Free of foreign influence or imitation, hopefully this Ma'oz Tzur will capture the hearts of those who yearn for true, authentic culture in Israel. So we'll play you a little sample of it. I think you'll hear right away why it didn't catch on. I paused a little bit. Go. Oh, it comes back. So it kind of goes on like that in that exact, very grand, sort of the piano prelude was playing the melody exactly. It's not, as it turns out, a great melody, but it certainly has its own charm. I think calling it free of foreign influence is a little funny because it is so clearly a major tune similar to the original. So slightly more chazanic cantorial improvisation around it is by the great Pierre Pinchik, who's sort of a mysterious figure in the old cantorate, and involves a lot of Hasidic things in here. And I want to especially listen to the way that he tries to really stress that line, that one problematic line that I talked about at the very beginning, that la'et tachin matbeach, when you will prepare a slaughtering place for the bleeding foe. He kind of gives you a little more focus on that than you might think. But he's recording this not long after the Holocaust. So there is a sense in which he was using the text of Ma'oz Tzur to connect with the way that he was feeling as a Jew living in the immediate post-Holocaust time.
Oh,
pause him there. I think that it's a really beautiful setting, and printed music is available if anyone is interested in singing it, and the printed music is quite singable. I'm going to go on to a traditional Hasidic melody. It's just a very, very sweet, sweet, sweet version that I really enjoy from the Slonim Hasidim. Just take a little listen and just feel the sweetness and the light that comes out of this melody.
Ma'oz Tzur yeshuvati lechanai leshaberu tikon betfilati v'shem tova nezaberu letzachim ma'alena nitacham namer
I just really, really enjoyed that melody every time. I like to spice it up every once in a while. I'll add that in for maybe one night of Hanukkah. So I want to present you with a few quick samples of some Sephardic melodies with one caveat, which is that Ma'oz Tzur is not traditionally a part of Sephardic liturgy. Many of them do tend to sing it now, but that's through the influence of Ashkenazim. So these melodies that are done in traditional styles are not necessarily traditional melodies, and frequently the recordings are put together for very, very, very commercial Hanukkah CDs. So hard to say that how authentic in whatever way these are, but they are certainly different takes in the text, and I kind of enjoy at least giving you a sample of the way the Jews might sound around the world. So first we'll start with the Bukharian community, which Bukharia is also Uzbekistan a little bit, led by Ezra Malakov. Come on. So you'll see the form of that tends to be the lines mostly repeat, and the second time the singer comes back around to it, he kind of adds a little variation on it. You'll see that form will pretty much stick with us for a lot of this. We'll try the Libyan one, which I think is probably the most obviously commercialized version of it.
Page 14.
And one more I'll give you. This is Joe Amar, the great Moroccan cantor from the Mizmor Shir Choir.
Page 15.
love that one. And I know we're very coming close to the end of time, so I just want to be moving forward aggressively here. Debbie Friedman's version. Very few, by the way, of these sort of contemporary Jewish singer-songwriters, David Friedman, Julie Silver, Craig Talman, etc., have actually written their own melodies to Ma'oz Tzur. Debbie wrote this melody as part of a Hanukkah cantata commissioned by Chicago Sinai congregation in 1973. So I love this quote by her that's on the album cover, so I want to share that, and then we'll play the melody. In every age, there are times of despair. There are dreams shattered, hearts broken, tears shed, and ideals lost. The theme of Hanukkah is one of renewal, a time of rededication, a time to go back and pick up the pieces with your people and take another step forward in pursuit of those precious dreams once forgotten. So here's Debbie's melody, and let's take her words as inspiration as we listen. I really enjoy that melody. It's kind of fun. It's got a good groove to it. It's a little bit of its time, perhaps, but I think there's still a lot of fun to it. And I hope more of us can take inspiration to write our own melodies for it. In our last 2 minutes, I want to present with you, a lot of Israelis think that there's another melody for Ma'oz Tzur that they know. They forget that it's just the first line. Naomi Shemer, the great Israeli singer and songwriter, sort of the queen of all Israeli music, in 1970 went down to visit the fortresses in the banks of the canal. We're talking the Suez Canal. In one of the fortresses, they showed me a huge Chanukiah made of munitions shells. The soldiers told me that each night they light this Chanukiah and sing Ma'oz Tzur in full voice so that those on the other side of the canal can hear. We're talking about, a time when shots are going back and forth all the time. And out of that comes this song, Shivchei Ma'oz, written by Naomi Shemer. So we'll play you a little bit of a recording of Shivchei Ma'oz. And the video of it, which you can find on YouTube, the music video of this very easily, shows you all these scenes of soldiers standing within sort of fire line of people on the other side. And indeed, that's the refrain, right? That Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati L'chana El Shabech, it starts, right? It's good to you, it's good to offer praise, but then it ends, standing somewhere in the heart of the night, someone who's looking to take my life is watching me. So it's kind of a scary song, but this is a piece of Israeli Hanukkah observance.
Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati L'chana El Shabech הרחק ליד ביתי הפרדסים אל הצורח אבוא במנהרות ובמצדות ובמערות ובנגלות צורים ובמחילות עפר את המלך הלילה דרוך בחרישי צופה בי מבקש נפשי.
So it's really sort of an intense melody, and there's a number of verses. So I want us to, I know we are just about exactly out of time, and I wish I had more time to answer more questions. I want us to finish with, Rex, do we have time for any questions at all?
Actually, at this point, we really don't have questions, more messages of congratulations on an excellent webinar. But I'm afraid we really are out of time, David.
Okay, so I'm going to finish with, we're going to, we can't all sing together because we're all in different places, but I'll put on one of my favorite recordings of that traditional melody, and you've got the words in front of you. Let's all go out singing, and we'll sing Ma'oz Tzur with full voice all over. Maybe if we're all singing and we're all over the place, maybe we'll all be able to hear it as if there's one beautiful choir somewhere singing. So let's go out singing with Ma'oz Tzur. Happy Hanukkah, everyone.